What's really good, everybody? This is Nathan Allebach, and welcome to the podcast where we get into people's stories and go down a bunch of rabbit holes about what's really good in the world. I can never say it seriously. I've got no news to share right now just because I'm actually behind a few podcasts yet again. It takes me so long to edit these things, and I do a lot throughout the week, so it's hard to find time sometimes, so I'm sorry about that. But we will just jump right into it today. For this episode, I had the privilege of speaking with Billy Mays III, who is the son of the late and legendary Pitchman, Billy Mays, who's become a cultural icon in recent decades, as most of you are probably aware of. This conversation was really cool to have, just because Billy and I share some similarities in being musicians, so we got into some great stuff that mainly focused around just personal identity, I guess you'd say. I mean, just what it's like being the son of someone who was larger than life in a way, and just how Billy's dad was like a pitchman for brands, and now Billy is becoming like a pitchman for his music, which he said, and I really, really like the way he put that. There's a lot in here. He's just had a really fascinating life that's given him a lot of unique perspective on the world, and I was really, really stoked to have the chance to pick his brain a little bit in these areas, and I think you'll dig it. Shout out to Matt Staggs, who does the talent booking for Joe Rogan's podcast. He hooked Billy and I up on Twitter, and he's just one of the nicest guys I've ever digitally met. Like, I don't even know the guy, but he's so nice and so kind. So appreciate you, Matt. You rule. I think that's it. I've got links to Billy's music and all his projects in the show notes, including Infinite Third, which is his main project, and then Mouth Council and BillyMays.org, which is like this platform that acts like a museum for the life of Billy's dad, and has a bunch of other cool campaigns and like a shop and all this stuff that he's been working on, which I checked it out. It's awesome. So yeah, as always, please rate the show on iTunes if you dig it, and hit me up on any social media platform if you got feedback. So yeah, now let's get into what's really good. Billy Mays, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, I know just from kind of looking into who you are and what you do that we have a lot of similarities, which I really want to get into throughout this. I mean,
cool.
Obviously, we'll cover your songwriting and your musical endeavors and all that. But first, I want to kind of lead into this by taking a dive into your personal identity, so we can kind of start broad. I guess we'll start here. Just what was it like, generally speaking, growing up as the son of Billy Mays?
Man, it's quite a tale.
It's a big question too.
Yeah. I guess my dad and my mom got divorced when I was pretty young, when I was like 3 years old. But pretty much the way I knew my dad after they got a divorce was he was this traveling pitchman. He would go to like home shows and like fairs, and he would sell products, basically like you would see him on TV, but he would basically just be on a booth selling products and like yelling at people to to come buy stuff. So that was, I mean, there were a few years in there where the majority of my time with him was spent when he would come for the week to the Pittsburgh home show in Pennsylvania, and I would spend that whole week with him. And I would literally be like playing with X-Men toys under the booth while he's pitching. So a huge part of my early life with my dad was spent just like absorbing his pitch, you know?
Yeah. How much was he around with that job and that whole situation?
Well, I guess I would see him a few times a year in different forms. And then as I got older, I would visit him in Florida, where he lived because he lived in Florida to be on the Home Shopping Network mostly, and a lot of the infomercial stuff was down here. So I would come visit for the summer sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I think that was sort of what made him like, or what made my parents get divorced is sort of he was like pursuing this dream that like was sort of unexplainable, and it wasn't really clear where it was going. And I think that as much as my mom like supported it. She just didn't want that for like the family. So they remained really good friends till he died, and they set a really good example of like, you know, not hating each other. So
right. So what was I guess like what was your relationship like to him then growing up, in the sense that like obviously if he's traveling all year round doing the hustle and you see him time to time and you have a relationship with him to an extent, but like how did you personally process having him as a dad as it pertains to like your own personal identity?
Yeah, well, it's funny because a lot of that stuff comes with hindsight. And growing up, he was kind of the good guy, you know, like he only had to swoop in for the fun stuff, you know, so he would kind of spoil me with, when he would see me, he would just sort of like, we would have fun. So he wasn't really like a parent as much.
Right.
He was just like my buddy. And the cool thing was like the last 5 years of his life, I got to live with him, and like we became really close, like as adults. And it's like, I didn't know it was going to be the last 5 years of his life, but that's what it was. So now, after that whole whirlwind of him dying and, you know, looking back on it, I see my connection to him as sort of this, like, I kind of see it as I'm living it. Like I'm living really similar paths. Like I'm on similar paths that he was. And I feel it all the time. And I know this because I was kind of absorbing it as a kid. But there's points in my life where I'm just like, wow, I know my dad felt exactly like this at some point. It makes me feel really connected to him.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you talk about how a lot of it's just hindsight 2020. I think that's so interesting in terms of just how we view, no matter what our circumstances are growing up, we all kind of view the way we perceived our parents growing up in hindsight. Because at the time we're kind of lost in our own transition and development and all that. But like for you personally, then at that time, just kind of growing up through like your teen years and then into your young adult years, do you consciously remember feeling like, oh wow, like I want to be like my dad, or like I feel like I have big shoes to fill, or did you feel like have any of those kind of sentiments, or was it more just like a distant thing?
Well, I'm currently 32 years old, and my dad didn't get on TV until he was like loosely on TV when I was in high school. Like he was on Home Shopping Network, and then like I think the OxyClean stuff was just starting to air in a bunch of places. So he was becoming kind of famous by the time I was graduating in high school. So I didn't really think of it like that as far as like, you know, the shadow of it until later on when I went to college. And every time I started a new class, people would say my name and make the joke like, oh, like the OxyClean guy. And like, I'd be like, oh, my response would be like, oh, never heard of him. And like the whole class would laugh because they all know that, you know, that we're related. And it's sort of a thing that, like, as a kid, I didn't grow up with the OxyClean guy as my dad, you know? So it was sort of a later in life thing. And now, and it feels like now I've lived more time as, like, son of the deceased famous Pitchman meme, Billy Mays, than I have, like, you know, the son of famous Billy Mays on the Tonight Show, like stuff like that, you know?
Right. Do you think that was like almost beneficial that you kind of both grew on your own separate paths in a developmental time? Like you were kind of going through your young adult transition while he was kind of coming into his fame and all that. So it wasn't something that, you know, hit you as like a child and you kind of were just immersed in that energy growing up. Like, yeah. In hindsight, is that like a positive thing?
For sure. I mean, most of my life, I can look back even at the worst parts of it and feel like that it's better that it happened that way. That's just kind of how I process things. I kind of know that it comes around to like, you know, the lessons I got from the way things were like make me exactly who I am right now. Yeah. So what you're asking about, yeah, I do think that I'm thankful that I didn't grow up some like extra, you know, with some massive extra privilege from that. And the funny thing is, like, my dad only got to enjoy his wealth and like mild fame for a few years before he died. And a big majority of that time he was in pain. He had 2 bad hip surgeries. So like the last 2 years of his life, he could barely walk. Yeah. So that part's a little sad to look at, but you know, it's funny. He kind of remained, even though he got that little taste of it at his peak, he kind of remained just like a dude who was like found himself in this on TV.
Right. Yeah. It's like the American dream. Like he totally embodied that personhood, and it never like, it wasn't like a a decades long thing where it just like was drawn out into fame. I mean, it was like a small taste of it there. So I kind of...
No, don't get me wrong. He hustled. He hustled for like a big portion of his life, and he would do well and then like have to keep hustling, you know, like it didn't come easy, but he was really good at what he did. So I did get to see him being successful, but not in the success that everyone knows him for. Right,
exactly. Yeah, so like he passed in 2009, so it's crazy. I just realized, and it's almost 10 years, I guess, to the day.
Yep.
Now it's like,
June 28th.
Yeah. So like, you would have been, you said you're 32 now, so I guess you'd have been 22. So you said in the last 5 years, you lived with him then, in those last few years, you said?
Yep. I went to college in Florida, and then I moved in with him after college.
So like, you kind of talked about like the transition from growing up and then becoming a young adult and getting to know him in that later phase. So like, what was that period like for you then around that time where you were kind of getting closer with him?
Man, it was really interesting. It was, I got to enjoy it and like immerse in what he was doing, his business, and like seeing that he was just sort of a one-man show and he didn't really have an agent or a publicist or anything.
Yeah.
But yet he's fielding these giant deals with like OxyClean and, you know, getting on the Tonight Show. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that he was signed as the spokesperson for Taco Bell when he died.
Wow.
So they were about to shoot these massive commercials for Taco Bell, and that was like one of the first deals where I feel like he had a real agent and he was like moving into that portion of his career. But yeah, I think I kind of played this role of like, we got really close. Like, I just felt like I got to sort of process a lot of it with him, and he couldn't really make sense of it all, you know, and he wasn't good on computers. So I got him on Twitter, you know, and like stuff like that. That was my role, was like kind of trying to help him engage on the internet. And he was always a fan of like being in on the joke, you know, about him, and like very playful dude. And I think that's what made me like that. And so I was starting to sort of be his version of a publicist at some point, where I felt like I was going to step into some kind of role of like representing him in that way. And he had that show Pitchman, and I was on that, you know, like we were sort of circling it, you know?
Yeah. And like you said, you kind of act as that bridge between this new weird space of internet culture and memes, where, you know, he's got like the appearance on South Park and like epic rap battles history. And there's all these like things that are popping up over time. And it is wild just to think, you know, for someone, I mean, even like when I think about my parents and just anyone in that relative age category, like how it's so far removed from what most of them understand. Like, it's just such like a weird space to think and to wrap your head around. Being a literal meme is so weird. like what's that been like for you? Like, has that evolved, I guess, over the past 10 years, just like living as the son of a actual meme? Like, it's so insane to even like conceptualize that. But I mean, there's not many people in the world that like embody that at such a global level, really.
Yeah, I think I really enjoy being like the unofficial like reference point of that, of him, you know, in the world. So I try to engage as much as I can. I have constantly have people tagging me and references to him or memes or whatever, and I love it. And I sort of collect them, and I'm actually literally today been working on compiling what I'm calling like the digital museum that we'll be launching, that will just sort of have as many photos and videos and memes and art, tribute art, as I could find, and just on one place.
Oh, so are you putting it on like a website or something?
Yeah, it'll be on billymays.org, which is the home of the nonprofit organization that I've been launching this year. Yeah, for the 10-year anniversary, pretty much. So,
that's amazing.
It's been in the making for a while. So I'm actually like right in the thick of planning a big event for the 10-year anniversary, where we're going to be launching a Billy Mays beer with a local brewery. One of the oldest craft breweries in Florida is called the Dunedin Brewery, and it's in the town of Dunedin. And my dad lived there for about 15 years of his life or more. I'm not even sure how long. And they've agreed. They kind of came up with the idea with me of doing a Billy Mays IPA, and we're launching it on the 10-year anniversary of his death, and it's all going to be for charity. And this project that it's benefiting is called the Laundry Project, funny enough, where they basically rent out laundromats in communities and make it a free like community center, basically, where they'll do your laundry for free and like provide some other services and things. And like anyone who needs it can just come and get some assistance.
That's amazing, man. That's so cool. Are you so you're spearheading this whole thing?
Yeah, it's my thing. I've been dancing around it for quite a few years, but I really had to study a lot and really focus the plan on what I want to do. And it's kind of just boiled down to like, I just want to do good things in my dad's name and like in my name. And I've kind of narrowed it down to like, I'm developing myself as a pitchman, but not a pitchman for inventions and gadgets, for good causes that I believe in. So hopefully we can direct some of that meme energy, at some good causes. That's the plan.
No, that's incredible, man. I love hearing just the way you're talking about it, just kind of embracing this as part of your identity. I mean, I think it's such an important conversation for in general for people to be having. Like, I think we all know people growing up who have gone through different circumstances. Some people have had terrible parents, some people have had great parents, most people are somewhere in between. And just like the notion of growing up and how our feelings about our parents change. And, like we kind of have this, you're growing up and like they're your idol or they're your god or whatever you want to call it. Like they're the person who's like larger than life in some way. And then you kind of get older and you start
your biggest influence.
Yeah. Like directly or indirectly, it's there no matter how you slice it. And then you kind of get older and then you start to rebel and you start to develop an ego and figure out who you are and what you want to do for yourself. And I think a lot of people, as they become just full-fledged adults, then they either throw that entire, concept aside and really just go forth trying to be who they are and separate from their parents. But a lot of people come back full circle almost and realize like, man, like I am my parents' kid. Like there's something. And not everybody has this, capability. Like some people experience trauma and all that growing up, and it's a totally different subject. But it's really cool to hear from you that this is something that you're embracing just as part of who you are. Like, is that something that, again, like is in hindsight that you've really started to kind of come into, just this idea of like owning your name, like owning your father's legacy?
Well, I think from day one of his death, I just sort of knew, like, I'm the window, like, I'm the continuation of him. Like, I had this really, I instantly felt, and this didn't last, I had to go through a lot of processing and, facing death and loss and everything. Yeah. But I remember having this, like, in the days after his death, having this, like, kind of just acceptance of it, knowing that I am, like, literally his descendant. Like, he just continued on through me, for better or worse, Yeah. And it's something that I really just focus on a lot, is that I think that's what happens generationally. I think we process what our parents couldn't. Hopefully we learn to process it better. And then if we are lucky enough to procreate, pass on an even better, more efficient, care for our kids, that then you look at 3 generations and you can really heal some trauma that's deep seated in our ancestors, passed down through generations.
Dude, it's so interesting that you said it in that way, just because, just going back to this whole idea of what do you, I talk about this a lot on my show because we kind of get into internet culture type stuff, and you think like the definition of what constitutes a meme, which is like the term like Richard Dawkins coined, which is just like the idea that like you're passing on information through like different mediums, like different physical mediums, and it kind of gets shared and recreated over time, and it's our way of passing information through culture. And when you think of genes, like genetics, like that's what you're passing on your genes through the person. So it's really interesting, like you are at that direct intersection where like you're passing on the genes and the memes, like in this like really cool way.
Yeah, I guess I kind of feel like my dad was a flawed human, like everyone is, and he had his amazing, generous, inspirational traits, but he was flawed just like any of us. Yeah. And there's something about the moment he died, he was like, the idea of him, the meme of him was free from those flaws. And now he's just an idea and an image out in the world that could be projected anything onto, and that's beautiful to me. That's like that just feels like he's everywhere now, instead of just in that like decaying body that he was in, that they couldn't even walk for at the end of it.
Yeah. It sounds like, I mean, just you kind of just going back to what you said previously there about how like the moment, the day that he passed, and how you could feel instantly this sort of like existential change inside of you about just like realizing the scope of what's going on in front of you and dealing with death and having to kind of move forward in these new ways. The way you talk about it just sounds like you have some kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, like a spiritual compass or something. Like, did that moment for you kind of like change the trajectory of your worldview at all?
Totally. I mean, I guess to give you some background on that year of my life, 2009, he passed away in June 28th. And a few months earlier, on February 22nd, 2009, I was involved in an apartment fire where I lost everything I owned. Mm-hmm. And I got out of it. It was in the middle of the night. I escaped, but I lost like everything I owned, clothes, tons of music gear, like pretty much my life at the time, possessions. And so that was the first thing I think that really like hit me hard and made me sort of have that inescapable realization of impermanence. But then to be hit a few months later with, losing my dad after we had just, I felt like we were just developing this amazing father-son relationship.
Yeah.
In a way, the fire prepared me for it, but in a way, they both piled onto each other and made it even more devastating and like a lot to accept at one time.
Yeah. Did you so from that period, like I guess kind of dating back then, growing up, like did you grow up with any kind of not even necessarily religious, but like any kind of like deeply held worldview about how things work? Or
man, I'm not really. I mean, I grew up Catholic, and
right, like culturally Catholic.
I never, and the one influence that I think that's positive that Catholicism had on my life was the music. I feel like I feel like I make music now, and my biggest influence is the Catholic Church and their minor chords and their like slow brooding, like I always feel that like that affected me on like a visceral level of like the devastation of their music and of their concepts, I guess, where they're like beating the shit out of Jesus on the walls,
Right. Yeah.
Like,
they're heavy
that was all pretty heavy.
Yeah. They love their liturgy.
So I mean, as far as like ideas about this kind of stuff, like I felt like I was sort of like innocent to loss in a lot of ways. Like I wasn't really like, I was like searching for it. I felt like when I got out of high school, I was like started to read some books and I like was introduced to some of the concepts, but then like you don't really understand until you go through real life things.
Right.
And then it changes you. And then thankfully I had some references of all different types of ideas and philosophies that are already talking about this, and I knew there were places I could go to like get some thoughts about it and kind of process them on my own.
Isn't that so interesting? Like I think about that all the time, just from where I'm at right now. Like with my wife, like we're kind of, I don't know. I don't want to throw a definition on it, but we're kind of like loosely into different spiritual stuff, and we both like, I guess you'd say like we're culturally agnostic in the sense like we don't really know either way, like if there's something after life and all that, but we both have like these predispositions to kind of believe in a higher calling or a higher purpose, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
it's interesting, like thinking about how we both grew up. I mean, I grew up pretty strictly religious. She grew up more similar to you, I'd say. We're kind of like culturally Catholic, and then she kind of got into some like non-denominational Protestant stuff. But I can speak for myself personally, at least. It's interesting as an adult now and thinking about the structure I had growing up and how important it is to have that as like a backdrop for when you're a kid. Like obviously, so many people's experience when it comes to religion is traumatic and crazy, and it's usually not something that they want to pass on to them, their future offspring in today's climate, at least. But I think there's something to what you just said there, where it's like, yeah, like now as an adult, you kind of have a framework to work with. It's almost like it's cool to start with the pieces, and then you can, as an adult or a teenager or whatever, like deconstruct from there. But it is interesting because like a lot of people I know, and most people I know, I should say, growing up, they had some type of cultural, religious background, but not most of them just didn't take it that seriously, or they didn't have like a deep invested interest into it. So by the time they're growing up and they've discovered this real loss and heartbreak and existential angst in different forms, now they have that thing to go back to, that like starting point almost, to be like, oh, I can start here and expand out from these like resources. So it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think it's good to have that as like a compass almost to kind of get you started. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I would actually say that my experience with the Catholic Church probably delayed my true knowing of myself a little longer than like a positive influence would. But at the same time, I can't say that it didn't. You know, maybe the negative aspects are what prodded me into who I am. So
right. Did it like stamp out your curiosity? Sorry.
Probably, yeah, something like that. I mean, I got beat up by a nun, dude. When I was like 10 years old, I was running down the hallway when I was like probably 9 or 10, and this nun who was the principal just like threw me up against the wall, and like everybody saw it, and I had bruises. My mom took pictures, and she was like gonna sue the school, because I went to a Catholic school, and they ended up just like kind of, I don't know if they threatened her, but it felt like, are you sure you want to bring that on your community? Like that kind of thing.
Right. Putting it, like gaslighting, like totally putting it back.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And like that shit stayed with me, and like it kind of made me like super cautious of this kind of authority, which is probably a good thing that I was exposed to it that early on. But,
right. That's like the opposing side that I wish more people, like from my religious friends specifically, understood that is like because it's power dynamics. I mean, it's like religion, you know, it's a powerful institution, and the people that tend to be at the top of it, and even like from a top-down level, like it's a very, very dicey thing the more, I guess, fundamentalist you get with it. So that sucks, man. Definitely. Sorry you.
No, it's all right. I laugh about it now. Sister Gertrude, she died a long time ago. I'm not mad at her, but I just felt like it's kind of funny, like, I got beat up by a nun, dude. Yeah. Like that's I have that to say for myself.
Yeah, no grudges towards Sister Gertrude. R.I.P.
Yeah. Well, none of the priests were touching me, so that's a good thing. That's a positive.
That's definitely positive. So I mean, kind of just like getting back to your music and how this all relates to this time period of when your dad passed. I'm interested to know, like, when I was just first kind of figuring out who you were and looking up your tunes and everything, I saw I'm assuming it's your first album. I looked back as far as I could. The album Gently, is that your first album?
Yep. That's it. That's what we're referring to when we're talking about that year. It was basically, that was the therapy of getting through all that stuff.
What was the process of writing that? Like, what was that whole, because I saw that you'd released it, I think it was in November or December of that same year.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like you were kind of writing as soon as the passing happened, and then you went right into it. So what was that whole thing like?
I mean, I had been making music since I was in high school, and always just like original music, even if it was bad, but like I was never really interested in like covers and stuff. So I just sort of learned my own way of playing guitar and doing things and sequencing songs, and I really enjoy that part still. That's like my favorite thing, is just like sequencing an album. But anyway, before February 2009, I was making a certain type of music. It was sort of like this weird melodic metal, like I didn't even know what to call it back then. I was just like doing these weirdly metal riffs, but they were super like bouncy and like not the standard stuff. It was very like melody heavy and harmonies, which I don't know. You can actually listen to it. I released an album called Qualia, and the project was called Perception is the World. So this is like where my head was at back then in like 2006. So I was making this certain type of music, but when I lost everything in the fire, not only did I lose like my custom made guitar that was made to play that kind of music and all the gear that was sort of built up around that, I lost like that sort of aggression too. And I think that what happened was, the first thing I was able to get after the fire, like maybe a month or two after the fire, was a guitar, Stratocaster, and like this little practice amp. And so I had to like sort of rebuild what music is for me. And I was sort of devastated. So I started making this like kind of soft, gentle music. And I had probably made about 3 songs. I wrote 3 songs and like half recorded them as demos. And then my dad died. And that was like, everything sort of stopped when that happened. I remember I just didn't really know what to do. And it was chaos at that time. It was like trying to figure that all out. And like, I don't know. There was that whole summer was just sort of like, doesn't really exist.
Yeah, you know? Just like a blur in your memory. Totally.
It's like off the record. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think what happened was, I was fortunate enough in August, right after the South Park episode came out, because I was a little worried about the South Park episode, because I'm a huge South Park fan, and I heard that week like there was a Dead Celebrities episode,
and you know what they do.
Be heavily, yeah. And so we got word right in the week, because they make it that week before it airs, that there was a Dead Celebrities episode, and it was heavily focused around my dad. So I didn't tell anyone, even though I had this inside scoop. Usually I would be like on Twitter, like, "Hey, my dad's gonna be on South Park tonight," but I didn't do that. I just sort of secretly like huddled up in my apartment, and I remember watching it and just like crying happy tears of just like, oh my God, this is just so amazing. Like my dad probably wouldn't even have understood it, but I was just like, how is my dad possibly on one of my favorite shows growing up? Like, you know, and they're like paying tribute to him basically, and like somewhat respectfully, you know?
Yeah.
And TMZ even like quoted me as saying like, I thought it was respectful, and like I just thought that was funny. But like, I'm not saying that South Park is respectful. I just respect South. And like, just to be, you know, mentioned by them is, to me, is like a huge honor. So that happened, and that was sort of like just a happy moment. I thought of, I ended up hearing that Trey Parker and Matt Stone knew that I saw it and that I said that, and they were like super happy about that. It was in like a commentary of one of the DVDs or something.
No way.
But yeah, so I was like, okay, cool. And so then I had this crazy blessing where my dad, I'm not even going to go into the whole story, but basically there was a free invitation to this retreat center in California. Like basically like you go and just eat raw food and hike every day. And it was like where Oprah goes and stuff.
Classic.
So basically they wanted my dad to come there because of something he did for the owner that was like really generous. And when she heard that he died, she basically passed the word along that like I could take that spot and have a free week there, which would cost like $5,000 or $6,000 or something.
Wow. So
I took that offer. I went for a week, and I will say that like that was when music came back to me as like therapy. It was like, in the mountains. I remember just like it was almost like I clicked back into where I was processing wise before my dad died, and I was like right back in that energy of like what became the album Gently. So I pretty much finished those songs in my head on the mountains, and then came home and recorded them for the next 3 months. And then I somehow put out an album by December. I had no idea what I was doing. Did it all myself. And something I've learned since then is like, don't release something in December because nobody cares. And there's just like a million things.
Yeah, the holidays.
Yeah. But I'm glad it came out then, December 15th. And I probably like could have done so many things better, but I learned so much. And that album still stands as like one of my most... I haven't recorded anything like it, and it actually connected with the fans of my dad because there was a Discovery Channel tribute to him after the last episode of Pitchman that kind of like was an hour-long tribute episode, and they used 3 of those songs in that episode. And so people sort of equated that, and like with the really emotional parts in the series, people crying, and you hear my songs in the background. So I still have people reference that album, and I still look back at it as like, wow, I couldn't have kept a better journal of my emotions that year. It was sort of like this optimism amongst devastation.
Right. And like, wouldn't you say you kind of created something that was just like bigger than just a normal art creation? Because like as soon as something like that gets elevated to that level, it's like you're now inviting so many other people in to share what you created, and it's attached to those really visceral feelings and nostalgia and memory and loss and all that. So like, do you feel like that specific album kind of will forever have a place?
Yeah, I sort of don't even touch it, you know, like I don't try to recreate it. I listen to it every once in a while. Just that's sort of like, it's like looking at an old photo, you know? And and I think that what happened was after the initial, like that year of like growth and like, I guess just finding silver linings and like positivity and loss, I think then I went through the hard shit. And I started making like super experimental music. Yeah. Just to do it, like just to get it out. And I made some great things, in my opinion, between 2010 and 2015. But I don't think it connected as much with those same people. So whatever, I gained like different types of connections.
Yeah, you kept growing.
With different types of people over those years. So yeah, and then it kind of came full circle to 8 years later. I put out the album Channels in 2017, which I felt sort of like touched on some of that energy again, but it was also 8 years later in my life, and I got to do like a Kickstarter for it, and I released it on vinyl, and I still have some records left. I perform that album live sometimes. And so I look at it as like Gently to Channels is sort of like a bookend of like an 8-year period of my life. And now that I'm like past that, I sort of feel a lot of freedom to just do whatever. I don't know why that was, I don't know why that was like an 8-year period, but it just something about it felt like that's what it was. Like, I have a whole inner mythology about my own discography. So
yeah, well, I was gonna say, yeah, it's interesting just to think how those songs, those albums coming out in different times in different places, like they have like it was inside of you and you needed to get it out. And now that it's out, I'm sure that's very liberating in a way, because now you're free to move on and try new things. It's like that's one of the hardest things about writing music, I feel like, is people inevitably, if you're successful at any level, they attach their identity to what you're creating. So like if all these people then, you know, attach their identity to that initial album, and then you continue to grow as a person, and you continue to change and produce new things, and you're inevitably gonna lose some people along the way and gain some people along the way. But it's all like part of that whole, like you kind of like alluded to there. It's just like it's a self-fulfilling journey where like you're putting stuff out there because it's inside of you. You know, like you had mentioned. I'm curious to know. Like you mentioned that that music was like therapy after that retreat. Like there was like a new therapeutic vibe that you felt that you needed to get out. So like was it like that beforehand for you, or was that like a new and specific energy just to that year?
I think after the fire, I was sort of like this broken down mess. And it was the first time I'd been making music for years, but it was the first time I connected my emotional process to my music. So I think that's what happened. And that was so innocent at the beginning, because I didn't even like think about it like that until later. Until like once it was out, I looked back and I was like, oh my God, that's how I got through that horrible year, was because I had that one thing to focus on. And that thing that I was focusing on was so plugged into my own processes that when I would complete a song, it was like I was completing like an emotional arc internally. So it all kind of corresponded, and like, so it doesn't really make sense looking back, but it totally like set me up to continue life and not really take the path of like depression and whatever that could be, like resentment, stuff like that.
Right, 'cause that could easily just suck you back down. And like, yeah, I remember, I mean, just for me personally, I started pursuing songwriting somewhere around 2010, so like a similar time period. And like for me, so much of it came out of like a need to express myself. You know, it helped channel like a few breakups I was going through in that time period. And I had a couple good friends of mine that I grew up with who passed away, and there was just a lot of like isolation I was feeling. I was kind of dealing with my family's religious upbringing and feeling isolated from them. So that was like, for me, that's kind of where it arose from. Like it was kind of like a need, I guess you'd say, similar to your 2009 experience. Where it's just like I needed to process my life through something. It just so happened that music was the medium. But like, were you already playing music before 2010? I think I started maybe around 2007, 2008, but it was really light. Like I was never I don't know what you want to call it. Like I was just never that invested into it. Like I wasn't that good. You know what I mean? Like there's certain friends of yours, I don't know how much of like a natural or like a prodigy you were when you started, but like for someone
not at all.
I joke with people because there's some people, like I always contrast myself with my cousin Matt, because we're like the same exact age, and growing up we did a lot of the same stuff, played a lot of the same sports, and I had been trying to get into songwriting and learning how to play guitar and singing and all that from like 2007 to 2010. And then 2010 is when I really started to just go for it. I mean, I was like, I don't care if I suck, I'm just going to go for it. But it's just funny because a few years after that, my cousin Matt started to learn how to play guitar, and he had grown up playing drums but nothing else, and he picked up a guitar and he started to do some songwriting. And I'm not joking when I say like within less than a year, I mean it was within like 6 to 8 months, he was just a phenom, and better than I was after years of practicing and like trying to train my voice. So it's just interesting because like it's a process, and like we all kind of get into it for different reasons. Like he had gotten into it for like he was also kind of going through like some angsty stuff. Like he had been kind of pressured to go to a college he didn't really want to go to, and then ended up going to get a degree he didn't really want. and then it was just kind of his way of processing, just feeling like, you know, misdirected and all that. So, but I'm curious because like obviously everyone kind of comes to the table from a slightly different place and different perspective and all that. Like for you growing up, like what was music to you? Was it an escape? Was it just a hobby? Like what initially got you into this whole thing?
Man, I think I wanted to be a musician. First I wanted to be a pro wrestler, but then I wanted to be a musician. And I think my mom was just so supportive that she was just like, he wants to be a musician. Like, let's do guitar lessons. Let's do all this stuff. Mm. And I always loved it. Like I loved being supported and making music, but I always felt like I wasn't good, like for years. Yeah. Like you're saying, like I would see other people and be like, oh, they're so good. And so I don't think it was like, it almost like wasn't conscious yet. I was just like making music because it felt good. And I enjoyed like I guess that was my only form of like solitude, like creating a song. It was like a world that only I knew like the language of. Mm. So my young naive self was always looking for validation from people like, hey, friends, listen to my mixes, and like in high school, and they didn't care. And so I would take it as like, oh, I must not be good, but I still enjoyed doing it. So I kept doing it. And then there's just a lot of years of different versions of that. And then I think right around like 2011, I think I like finally unlocked some kind of, I guess, some relationship with improvisation and realizing that like it didn't come from perfection and like practice, like chasing perfection. It came from like freedom, like just feeling free and being myself completely. And it kind of made me this like perpetual beginner, like amateur, where like my sets aren't always perfect, but they're actually sometimes like really magical in ways that I couldn't plan. And so I think that has been my more recent journey, has been from first trying to overplan it and control it, and then learning to not control it at all, which caused this like experimentation craziness that like wasn't really coherent. And then now I'm somewhere in the middle where I know it has to come from that endless well of like, my mind can't take credit for it kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then harnessing that with my mind and like planning it and curating it basically into something presentable and coherent that has some sort of message that's special to me.
Right. And you have a really unique approach just to music in general. I was kind of just going through your discography and over the years kind of seeing how the styles have evolved and all that. And I was just curious, like what initially got you into just this more experimental, instrumental, whatever you want to call it, like this kind of like mishmash style of playing, which isn't really like there's not really let me frame it this way. There's not really a scene for that type of music in a lot of areas. Like where I grew up, there was like a hardcore scene, there was like a punk scene, and then I kind of got into like acoustic stuff. There's like a coffee house scene, but with like what you do, it's not really a like a trendy thing that you can just hop on. You know what I mean?
Well, man, I mean, I've joked with my one friend who's been with me since the beginning. Like he's done a lot of my album art and stuff like that. I joke that like we've joked that like I must be a good pitchman if I get gigs everywhere, and I can like I kind of have my own local like circuit that I run and touring circuit where it's like the most inaccessible music, but it sort of has like this universally acceptable vibe about it. So I don't know how it happened, and I'm just really thankful that it's like almost like I believed in the weirdness of it. I believe that what seems weird is just like it's the authenticity of me. Like it would seem weird to anyone, you know, just what I am authentically, because they don't, that's the best way to show what's going on in my experience. So I think that, I don't know, it's scene wise, I'm really thankful that I got to grow up musically in a live music scene that was sort of this DIY experimental, what they call like harsh noise scene. Yeah. Just noise, you know, it's people circuit bending. And there's a place called the Venture Compound in St. Pete, Florida here. And I played one of my first shows there, and I played plenty of shows a year for as long as it was open. And so I would play these like noise festivals where I would turn out to be the least experimental thing there, but it allowed me to sort of go fully into that. And that's where I really found the primal expression of it. Whereas like, I couldn't even, like when I was making Gently, I didn't even play live. I was like, oh, I don't know how to play this stuff live. It doesn't really work.
Yeah.
But then that's sort of what happened is I discovered the act of doing it does translate to live, but and the way I do it is sort of a very specific offering. And that's evolved now into me doing what I call ambient installations, where I'll play for 3 or 4 hours at a place and just sort of exist.
Yeah, just riff.
Like a nonstop song, like just looping, and that's how I develop my music now. It's like I just play and I live stream it, and that's where I feel most at home. I feel like it's like my martial arts practice.
That's awesome. Do you feel like in a weird way that you've kind of evolved musically along with the internet? Because it feels like the internet as just a hub. Like now when you put material online, you can get all these kind of like niche weirdos who are into all sorts of different styles. They can find you now. Like whereas, decades ago, like if you did this type of music, you might have a way harder time getting it in front of people or kind of finding other influences to bounce off of. Now you have like access at your fingertips, and then people have access at their fingertips to listen to you.
On one hand, totally. I don't think what I do would be viable in any other time period. And like now I even have like a Patreon, which totally goes with what I'm doing, which is I'm just releasing as much as I can all the time and just hoping that people want to support it. Like I'm not always creating a product to sell. So Patreon provides this like just connection, and it's like more moral support, even though it's money. It's like the fact that people are subscribing to me, and I'm not even like withholding anything, like for subscribers only. It's just like a really, really encouraging thing.
Yeah, they care.
So, but on the other hand, I do feel like maybe back in like 2012 ish, I felt like I was crushing it. I made a song a day. I made a song a day from May 1st, 2012 to May 1st, 2013 on SoundCloud. And I called it the Daily Drops. And so that really to me, that was what got me in the habit of just making something and letting it go, And I thought it was a great project. My friend who I was talking about, Javi, he did a piece of art a day that became the cover art for it. And we did it for 365 days.
Wow.
And like, it didn't get that much. It was kind of like, I don't know. I just felt like I didn't really reach the audience that would have been into it at the time. And I feel like now with my audience, if I were doing a song a day, it would be crushing it. But I just felt like I was like kind of out of the right time on that one in some weird way.
Dude, that's wild. I mean, like just listening to you kind of get into all this. I mean, obviously you're a hustler, just like your dad. You know what I mean? Like,
okay, so that's one of the biggest. That's one of the biggest like metaphors or allegory. I don't know what the term would be, but like it hit me one day when I was actually like when my dad died. There were some loose offers for me to like just try pitching and like kind of fill his shoes, And I was just like, no, that's not what I do. I'm an artist. I'm a musician, and I kept being like, no, I'm not into that industry and stuff. And I'm still not, but it occurred to me probably in the last 3 or 4 years, really clearly that I'm such a pitchman and it's for my music. And that was even like, they did a Tampa Bay Times article about my ambient installation series. And like, it was in print on like Easter Sunday. And part of the headline was like, he's a pitchman, but for his music. And I was just like, oh man, they get it too. And then, so it just slowly kept hitting me like, I'm a pitchman. And to the point where last year on tour, I did a month-long East Coast tour, and it was my most successful one yet. I did like something, I think it was 25 shows in like 28 days or something like that. And it was amazing. And I totally enjoyed it, but it really hit me that I was basically doing what my dad did when he was touring these circuits with products, except he was performing and the performance was pitching a product, and I'm performing, and then I have a merch table where that's the product of what I was performing. And it was just like totally hit me in this weird way where it was just like, oh man, I'm just living. I'm like getting a second chance at his life, basically. Yeah, it's just a totally different light.
It's so poetic. It's like you can't escape your biology. This is just who you were meant to be.
Yep.
I mean, like, obviously your stuff's incredible, and like you've clearly just like listening to you talk. I mean, this is part of like a lifetime's amount of work. But I'm also wondering, this is something that I struggle with a lot, and I'd love to hear your take on it to see if you have any thoughts personally. But just like based purely off the fact that your dad was who he was, like, has that in recent years led to any feelings of like imposter syndrome or guilt for your success? Like, I know you're kind of like, you're separate completely as far as like your hard work and all that.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, just having the name, and just like feeling like this is like the direction or the destiny, whatever you want to call it, and how other people are going to perceive that.
Yeah, and I've dealt with that a little bit, and I do feel that some people have assumptions about me, you know, if they don't know anything, and they the ones that I've like come into contact with were just totally not what I deal with in my life. Like I'm not like Michael Jackson's son or something, you know, like I'm like I said, my dad had this little taste of fame and wealth, and like, that's it. It didn't like, I didn't get some big trust fund, you know, that I'm like doing this all with. Like, I've been working these past 10 years. I've been basically a freelance like production assistant on like infomercial sets. And I only quit doing that about 2 years ago to fully pursue music. So there's that. I have gotten a lot of support and opportunity from people who knew my dad. And there's definitely like a part of it that it's this thing where it's kind of a double edge, where I'll tell someone my name and they'll like maybe laugh at first or something, and then I'll have to be like, hey, yeah, that was my dad, that kind of thing. So that kind of is, it can be both positive and negative, because sometimes people will treat me so like they won't be present with me. And then as soon as they learn that info, they just become super like zoomed in.
Oh, that's annoying.
On like, what can I extract from this situation, or like how can I, you know? And I totally sense it when that happens. Yeah, and I totally sense it, and it doesn't make me like angry. It just sort of makes me like take note. Like, oh, okay, so they changed their perception of me based on that one aspect of my life, and I'm used to it. So I'm not like, it's a small portion of it. But the other side of that is, yeah, of course, I love the interaction of, oh, and he's Billy Mays' son. Like, I love that. Like, I played a house show, and they all found out at the show, like the people who were hosting the show, who my dad was. And I just feel like it's a fun time, you know. That to me is like really, I don't shy away from that. I'm not embarrassed of it. I'm actually like really proud of it. But I would say that I did a good enough job, probably for the wrong reasons, of like not wanting to just capitalize on my dad, that I didn't take a lot of the opportunities that were like, I knew weren't the right path for me.
Right.
So now I feel like it's 10 years later, and like, yeah, some of that, now I'm ready to like keep getting out there and keep growing. But it's not like I have paparazzi, you know, ready to take pictures of me. Like, it's just funny. I'm just a dude. And like, so I just don't think it's all pretty just social interaction based, you know, where you'll see, like, even today I was at the mechanic, and my new mechanic, who he replaced my spark plugs, found out who I was by my name when I gave him my name and my phone number. And he just like got a kick out of it. And we started talking. He was like, oh, I'll see your dad around town sometimes. Like, cause my dad's like most known in this Tampa Bay area. Like, a lot of people have stories of meeting him somewhere, and you know, it's great. It's like, we had like an extra connection, even though he was already a cool guy. I think he already liked me before he knew that. Once he found out, it was like, we're buddies now.
Right.
So I would like to think that we would have been buddies either way, but now he's probably going to remember me more as, you know, as that, which is fine.
Right. And like,
but I think to answer.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to try to like answer your question, but then I thought, well, what was the original question? I want to make sure that we talk about it clearly.
No, yeah,
you nailed it. Were originally asking. Okay.
Yeah, you nailed it. It's just interesting. This kind of goes back to what we were saying, or you were saying earlier in the conversation, just about how at this point in your life, like, you're fully embracing who you are and how your identity relates to your dad. And I think that is just so important, because there's only, especially in today's climate, like, there's so many weird, I don't know, like on social media, there's so much lingo and terminology around like this idea, like you said, it's kind of like a caricature where like some people I'm sure would look at you and not know you at all and just be like, oh, like it's like a situation like a Michael Jackson's kid situation, just be like, oh, like, like, they're like some privileged kid, like well off, or whatever, but obviously it's not the case.
I have privilege. I definitely have some privilege, but it's for other reasons than who my dad was. You know?
Right, and you embrace it, which I think is so important because, like you said, you can't really. There's to a degree. I mean, I think it's great to be able to acknowledge it and call it out and like really just talk through what it means to different people. I mean, obviously, it means something different to you than it does to me. Like I kind of alluded to before. I mean, this is something I've dealt with my whole life, and like my dad's not like a famous person, or he's not like super wealthy. Like, but he is this. You know, he's a small business owner, and he has this kind of like rags to riches story. You know, like where he just kind of had all the wrong deck of cards handed to him and made a ton of terrible decisions, and then somehow turned it all around, got his life together, raised a great family, and like now we have a great relationship. And it's one of those things where you know, it's like,
I love that.
Yeah, it's one of those rare cool stories, and like obviously from a social standpoint, I mean, like I know. Like being my dad's kid, like I know he's a great guy. Like I know who he is on an intimate level, and the people in our lives like that are close to us do. But there's also that like from the outside looking in, where it's just like as much as I know who I am, I know who my dad is. There's still this like weird, just like element with certain people where like you know that they're just thinking like, oh, like that kid is super privileged to have grown up with that person as their dad, and like you know, like, and I think an element of that is good because like there's a lot of increased social conversations happening today around class and privilege. I think these are all they're important conversations to have, but as I'm sure you know at this point on social media, it's easy to get swept into like an outrage mob and kind of just feel like you're personally attacked for something that you didn't do or that like isn't you. And then you have to be in this weird defensive position where you're explaining to strangers in a lot of cases like who you are, and meanwhile like on a personal level, like you've been saying, you're already dealing with this double-edged sword on a day-to-day basis because you don't know how many people you're talking to actually want to talk to you, or if they just want something from you as soon as they figure this out. And that's like that's already a weird tightrope to be walking.
Yeah, you're right about the conversations that are happening in society are very overall just a positive step of let's face all this shit.
Yeah.
But I do think that the one like what trumps the societal conversation is everyone's own personal like family and the issues that come with just everyone has some kind of internal familial issue. And I think that like by pointing outward to like society and like other people's families first, that's probably where the outrage comes from, is sort of this like it's too uncomfortable to look at what I have to deal with, so I'm going to put it out there and look for the problems out there. But I just think that like we all had, like you said, your dad is this vast story and something that only you know the details to. And I think that we all have that, no matter who your dad is, who your mom is, who your uncle that raised you is, like everyone has that. So I just think that I just really like the idea that it's like, it's for me, it's my experience. And I don't have to tell everyone about the details. I have to like live the lessons of it and demonstrate them just in my character. So I'm not like, that's why I'm not like super defensive about the stuff about my dad, because he was who he was and that's it. And now I'm someone who's like kind of taken up the mantle of that. And in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm on a more refined path than he was, but it's because of his mistakes and me getting to witness them. And so emotionally, I feel much more plugged in. So like whatever, addictions or problems he had in his life, I feel where the root cause is like unchecked emotions that just build into all these different negative patterns. And I already feel like because of his mistakes and his missteps, I'm at more of a head start than he was even. So, I don't fault him for any of those things. He did the best he could, and I think that we could say that about most of our parents. Like they did the best they could with what they were given. Even if you think your your parent is a shithead, chances are someone was a shithead to them.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
It just gets passed on, you know?
Well, that just reminded me of two things. One, I saw earlier today when I was prepping for this, you had retweeted a tweet of yours from last year, which I loved, which was like, you said something about like our job, I guess, as like each generation, you know, like our parents, like, how did you word it? I know,
Yep.
I know, you know the
I know
tweet
the
I'm
one.
talking
So
about. Yeah.
I was seriously like, this is one of these phrases that, like, I don't write lyrics for music, but I do have a book of poetry that I put out called Impersonal Verses that's on Amazon, and I'm super proud of it. I don't know if I'll ever write another book, but I still stand by it. I think it released in like 2016.
Cool.
And it's only available as paperback. And sometimes these phrases will just hit me, and it kind of feels like a guitar riff or something, where I'll just loop until it's there. I'll loop it until it's like ready to be said. And then when I say it, it just kind of lives there. And I'm like, okay, that's for me or for whoever. And that one kind of stuck with me. I think it was, we are here to process the emotions that our ancestors couldn't, so that our descendants don't have to.
Oh, love that.
And that was seriously like I was eating a burrito at one of my favorite Mexican restaurants here in town. And it just inhabited my brain. And I think I just tweeted it like maybe 15 minutes later. And then I found that tweet again later, and I was like, oh my God, this thought stands above my mind. Like, I didn't painstakingly map this thought out. It just like came to me, and it's probably not from me. It's probably a combination of like 3 different ideas that really intelligent people said, and I just like put them together in my interpretation of it.
Right. It resonated with me for a lot of reasons, but one specifically, just a few days ago, I was going through just like looking stuff up about you, kind of seeing like what we could talk about, and I was going through your Reddit AMA from like 4 or 5 years ago, which, dude, yeah. I've read a lot of AMAs in my life, and like it was a phenomenal one. Like I'm
glad. Yeah.
It was great, and like, you know, because usually with those things, I mean, especially, I don't know, like given a lot of people's circumstances, that who they are and when they go into an AMA, they usually tend to skirt a lot of questions and like answer in really just generic ways. And the one that really stood out to me, and I'm sure it stood out to you too, was and I don't even remember what the question was, but it was someone...
I think the person deleted the comment.
Okay, so that must be why. That must be why.
Because I think a few people were like offended that he brought that topic up.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted.
I knew it was inevitable. It was about the reports of, I guess, cocaine use in my dad's toxicology report, which in itself I have the whole story of like what was going on, and like I don't know if that was really the thing that did it, if it was even there. It was sort of a questionable part of it anyway. Yeah. And I've had a few people reach out to me and say that to discredit the person who did that report, because he was sort of known for doing this with like well-known people. So I wasn't too concerned with that, but like I knew, you know, that at the time it was really like devastating, because it brought up a lot of things in the way society views what drugs are. Yeah. You know, that somebody is like a bad person because they're using drugs anyway. The real problem, I think, is that my dad was on probably not a good amount of painkillers for his hip and for whatever else emotionally he was dealing with. So, you know, it was more of a cocktail of things that killed him anyway. So I'm not concerned with like, there's a calcium deposit found that points to possible cocaine use within the days before his death. Like, that doesn't, who cares, you know, whatever. But I knew that was like, TMZ reported it, and like that was like the hot button issue in the headline, like, oh my God. So somebody brought it up in the AMA, which I knew was going to happen. And I don't even remember the answer really. I think I just sort of calmly thought about it and just started talking about it. Like, yeah, maybe, like, that doesn't concern me, I guess. And, you know, you can give your interpretation of what I said, because you probably more fresh on it. But no, I do remember that's still to this day my top rated comment. No. My whole now like on Reddit. Like, I was very new to Reddit. Yeah, I actually only did the AMA because I was like 2 months into Reddit, and I brought who my dad was up casually in like a wrestling thread. In case you didn't know, I'm a wrestling fan. So I lurk in Squared Circle a lot, which is the wrestling subreddit. So I think I brought up a picture of me and my dad and Hulk Hogan that exists when I got to go to Hulk Hogan's house.
Amazing.
And I posted it, and everyone was like, you should do an AMA. And I didn't even know what an AMA was. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. Like the next day I started one. And I didn't know it was going to be on the front page for 2 days.
Yeah, blew up.
You know, like I didn't know. So I just sat there for hours and hours just reading everything. Like, holy shit. And I had friends reaching out to me like, oh my God, you did an AMA. Like, and I still have people every once in a while like, dude, I loved your AMA. Like, I just think it's really awesome. But I was so inexperienced, but I knew I did something right because that comment just blew up, and I wasn't answering it because I knew that was going to be like the big thing. But then I was like, oh, okay, so this is what you do. You like, it's always better to just be honest and, you know, be transparent about what you're feeling and what your take on something is, and when it's that personal. So I'm glad I didn't ignore it, or I didn't really think to. If you go deep in that AMA, I was going pretty deep in those comments and replying.
Kept going.
Yeah. But that was just me being excited that like people cared, you know, about my dad and about, you know, my relationship to my dad. And I was just like, yeah, that still blows my mind that exists. But yeah, the guy ended up, or the original person who asked the question deleted their comment, probably because some of maybe a small percentage of the comments were like, why would you ask that?
Yeah,
that's so
right,
disrespectful. Right. And I was like, well, I didn't think it was disrespectful, but
yeah, no, it was just, I mean, it was super impressive to me just because it was so honest. I mean, it was just very, very transparent and felt like it was a real human being answering it. And you weren't defensive. You weren't angry. It was just very, very thoughtful. And I was really impressed, just granted how sensitive of a topic that is. Like you were saying, especially on a cultural level alone, like let alone it being your own family, just thinking how much that topic is so just polarizing, and you know, it's not even like a rarity. I mean, it's one of the most common ways that media distorts headlines and distorts stories around drug usage, which is like it's
a huge issue.
Yeah, I mean, like the drug war's been going on forever.
It's ingrained in like you're a criminal if you do drugs, and that's just making it worse. It's making people just keep it in shadow and like hide it, and then become worse addicts, and then you know. It's just not, then it makes it hard to get treatment. And there's so many, like, there's so much wrong with it that's like goes beyond my dad. So like my dad wasn't even, I would say my dad overlaps more with like the pharmaceutical side of like opiates and stuff, that like that's a huge problem. And that's all based on profits. And I mean, the drug war is too, I'm sure, and incarceration and stuff like that in private prisons. But I wouldn't call myself like a journalist of these things, but it's pretty clear to me from my own personal experience that like, some people view someone doing drugs as like instantly bad person. Yeah. And it's just like, they don't understand like the reason people do drugs is because they're hurt or they're not processing what they need to process, you know? Yeah. They don't feel safe to do that. They don't, for whatever reason, but like there's plenty of reasons that our society causes people to feel uncomfortable. So like, how could it be that surprising that people want to medicate those feelings?
Right. And it's such it's just so sensitive, and there are so many different angles with it when you, like you said, where there's the pharmaceutical angle where it's like that's affecting, you know, much more like suburban areas where you have the like opioid epidemic rising and all that. And then you have like the crack epidemic and more of like, you know, people getting put in prison for amounts of weed and just ridiculous stuff like that. Yeah. But yeah, the whole thing just it's stigmatized as a whole, and it really is. It's messed up. I mean, like literally just this past week, my dad, actually just a couple days ago, my dad posted on Facebook about this whole situation where I was just talking to him about this. This guy stole about like $2,000 worth of equipment from their shed, just like random tools and like, you know, like mostly like, you know, like what do you call it? Like a power leaf blower and like those types of tools. And his reaction to it was so interesting when I was talking to him about it, because growing up he was an addict and he was also a dealer, and just he kind of like he grew up in that whole scene, and once he got out of it, he made that kind of part of his whatever you want to call it, like lifelong mission, or just kind of like part of his whatever, like as a human, like he just really wanted to help people. And he's got.
So what you're saying is he has empathy for.
Exactly. That's what I'm I'm getting
because
at. Yeah.
he's been there.
Yeah, so when we were talking about it, he was literally just laughing. It was so funny. He's like, I think I know who did this. It's this guy that like I was helping out like a year ago, and I just heard through someone that he relapsed, and I guarantee, because it's always someone when it's a situation like that.
Yeah.
And it was just so interesting, like hearing the way he talked about it, and then versus like when he posted on Facebook, of course, everyone's pissed. Everyone's like, screw that guy, basically, and like that's just the general kind of attitude.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, like
that's beautiful that your dad thinks like that. I love that.
Yeah, but it sucks because it does take that empathy. Like I have one of my best friends growing up. He's been in ACT his whole life, pretty much. He's been in and out of jail 4 times now, and his parents they're very sweet, but they've also had an insanely chaotic life with him and some of the other siblings, and it's wild like how over the years their just general perspectives on all this have obviously changed, and like obviously they're much more sensitive and empathetic to like what these drugs do and why someone goes to these drugs, and like the complexities behind the like what goes underneath everything. Whereas on the surface we just say drugs bad, stealing bad, crime bad, and no one wants to look underneath and think what is causing this. Like your dad was in pain, you said earlier in the podcast, like for years, just like toward the end of his life, and that's no one, like the headlines aren't talking about that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so messed up. But
and in a way, I get it. Like they're just responding to the societal programming. So I don't think like TMZ is necessarily at fault. TMZ is gonna like, TMZ has its own. Yeah, they have their own issues, but like if there's one thing that they are, it's like they're pretty reliable. Of like this is what we found, and
exactly
this is how we're going to present it to you is how you want it to be presented to you.
Yeah.
Like here's the juicy part,
right?
So.
Yeah.
TMZ, the weirdest part about TMZ to me is they kind of like do the headline where it's like a quote, but it's not a real quote. It's like, and the weird part for me was when my dad died that year, 2009, for Halloween, every year leading up to his death, people had sent me costumes of people dressed as him.
Right.
So that was a big thing. And so that year I was like, hell yeah, like, dress up as them. I definitely support that. Let's do a contest. We did a contest where I didn't know how many we would get, and we made it so that like me and a few other of my dad's friends would like rate them and pick like the top 3 and then give them prizes. We basically gave them like infomercial care packages of like OxyClean and everything that we could find. And yeah, so we did that, and I picked 3 winners, and we got about over 500 entries. You'll find them all in my little archive. There's like an outrageous amount. And it was like way overwhelming, and I loved it. But TMZ, they reported on it, and their headline was, "I want to be haunted by my father, Billy Mays III." Like, and I was just like, I don't know who would even say that. That's not like that's not even. I don't know. I don't understand. So that was when I realized like that's something like I'm surprised TMZ does that, like because I didn't say it. There's just like no evidence of me saying that. I know I didn't say it, so it just Anyway, that's my
news.
Yeah, that's my bigger gripe with TMZ.
Jeez,
like,
man.
TMZ's fine, but the fact that they quoted me like that,
man, that's hilarious. You just can't control it to a certain degree. But to your credit, with all this, it's so fascinating from the outside looking in, seeing someone so composed and so open to embrace the kind of imperfections and the messiness of like what's going on here. And like obviously, like you said with your tweet, which is what I brought up initially, because I think that kind of speaks to this exact same thing. It's like your willingness to get into that and to not run from it and not try to ignore it or push it under the rug. I think that's so important, for someone, especially in your shoes, just because like you got a lot to process. You got a lifetime to work with here as far as dealing with your dad's legacy and how it's affecting you as a person, the person you want to be through your own art and your own creations, and how you process those imperfections along the way. It's gonna be like, I don't know, like if you have a family of your own at this point, or what your situation is, but
I'm in a relationship and we have a dog, probably building towards a family, but yeah, I mean, that's my life, is like, this shit's messy,
Yeah.
Like, everyone's dealing with some sort of messiness. It's messy out here. So like, we should be talking about it.
Right. How, like, at this point in your life, how, I should say it's like you've kind of been mentioning things throughout the episode of stuff you're working on, these different projects, like this museum with your dad. You have all this stuff going on, and just from a quick Google search, it seems like you have done so much work the past few years. I mean, like, is there a centerpiece right now to what you're doing that you're kind of putting your focus on? Or are you the kind of person that just puts eggs in a bunch of different baskets and you're always jumping around?
Probably somewhere in the middle. Like, I look at it as like my personality, or like, anyone, my art sort of has seasons. So like right now it's coming back around to like, I'm going to be on tour from April 23rd to May 19th. So like, that's a heavily focused on live Infinite Third music for that month. And this year I've been doing 3 songs per month. I've been releasing 3 songs per month, and it's on the 3rd, the 13th, and the 23rd of every month. And that's through Patreon. So I've got 9 of those out now because it was just March 23rd. So that's my like solid artistic focus right now, is like developing my live set, getting ready to go on tour. And then in the meantime, also doing these sort of impromptu songs that I'm doing it more as a practice, but then also I feel like I'm sharing my sketchbook in real time. That's kind of how I look at it. Is they're not songs that I spent months on. They're songs that I spent 2-3 days max on.
Do you feel like through all that, and especially in like this more spontaneous stuff, like you're saying here, where it's not finished works of art, you're really just going in and putting it all out there. Do you in any way feel like that's like a religious experience to you almost?
Totally. I mean, it's the most reliable form of, I guess, transcendence that I know of for myself. And it's totally because, like, I couldn't have planned. I don't know if you've seen my live setup. I sit in the middle of like a big, I sit on the ground, and I have an amp and a speaker behind me, and I have a looper, a big pedal board, my guitar, and then like also this little beat machine and rope lights. And I have like this flashing light behind me, but like I couldn't have planned it that way. What I was doing was I was like creating an altar basically. And now like it's traveling altar that just goes wherever I want. And it just becomes my little, I don't know what the religious terms would be, but I think it's because I let it be what it was going to be. And I didn't say I'm this type of musician. Like I didn't plan to be an ambient guitarist, and I couldn't have planned it. Like I wouldn't have chose that, Yeah. But it turns out that like that's one of the ways that I go. And like, but also I have this like heavy side. So like if you listen to my album Channels, that to me encompasses a lot of my different approaches and different sounds and different vibes. So I think it's just always been this. I've called it like a spiritual exploration of sound. Like sound is this medium that is really sacred. If you think about it, it's time based, and it's like everything has vibration and sound. Like I don't want to get too weird about it, but
no, keep going.
It's without like I've almost like grown with all these ideas in my head of like new age shit, and I've come so full circle that like the cliches of all that have become more true, even though I've like kind of let them go.
That's how it works.
And I've just been and then you come back around to it and you're like, oh, that's why it's a cliche, is because everything is vibrating all the time. And like, the plane that just went over my house is like, that's music. It's not different. Like it's really not different. It's just like a little bit more organized for the human mind when you make it music. But I mean, that's why I come from this harsh noise background. It wasn't until I was at a noise show, and it took about 3 hours to really understand how profound the experience was. At first I'm just like, oh, this is grating. It's just like, it's noise. But then I remember coming out of it, hearing like a bulldozer and being like, oh, fuck yeah. Like that's a song. Like I can't believe how mind blowing that sound is if you really break it down and you like experience it. And so I think that sound is just like this medium. And that's why a lot of people see my live sets and they're like, oh, you should project some trippy visuals above you. And like, it has happened in the past where someone has been like projecting something over me. Right. But like, I totally prefer just like, we're in this room, the lights aren't even off. They're just like dim, and it's about where we are. And we're like, it's kind of inescapable. You can't like, you can dream inside your mind and like have visions, but I don't want to distract us from where we are with like a movie playing above me. Like I like us to focus on the noise of it and the situation that we're in and how weird it is and how surreal it can be to just gather around someone who's emanating like electrical currents into your ears. It's just like, it's so weird to me, and I love it. I love that I can show up in a town, someone will set up a time and a place for me to show up, set up, and then like all of a sudden I'm speaking in like an alien language that is just like the result of me manipulating electricity and vibrations. I just think it's like, I couldn't have planned it. I didn't know that's what music was when I started making music. I thought music was arenas and bands, and it is those things. But I was listening to like System of a Down and bands like that, and I didn't realize that there was like a whole spectrum of how to deliver sound to the eardrums. And that's sort of what I'm fascinated by. It doesn't mean I don't want to play large venues and stuff. It's just like, I totally appreciate the small yet profound nature of just playing for a few people in a living room.
Well,
I love it.
After hearing you get into now your philosophy of how you understand and how you perceive music, all of a sudden your project Mouth Council makes way more sense. I was going to ask you about it, like if you could explain it to people, but now it totally makes sense to me. But yeah, if you could explain to people listening, like what's that all about? Like why'd you start that?
Well, so Mouth Council sort of grew almost as a response to Infinite Third throughout the years, and it's run totally parallel to it. So Mouth Council is, I guess I would call it my side project, but it started about 6 or 7 years ago, where I would have one of my loop pedals and I would just be messing around, and I would have a friend who's just like watching me, and they'd start singing or something along, and I'd be like, oh, sing into this. And I'd hand them a microphone and I would loop their voice and sort of like play with it with limited technology that I had at the time. And then that grew into like, let's do that thing. Let's loop each other's voices. And then it became, 3 people are there. Let's sit around and pass around the microphone, until I got this nice 5-channel Boss looper called the RC505. And I bought it right when it came out. Like I was on the waiting list for it when I heard that it was coming out. And so I was probably one of the first like few hundred people to own one. So then I basically made it a more formal thing. And I would have friends over if we were like hanging out, and everyone would sit in a circle. I would start and just like beatbox a little bit into the microphone, loop it, and I would pass it to the next person and just kind of encourage them to do whatever they wanted at that time, and then keep passing it. And I'd be mixing the whole time, bringing things in and out and putting effects on it and like basically making a song on the spot. So at one point, one of the original people that was doing this with me came up to me and he was just like, man, I love what you're doing. It's like this, it's sort of like this Mouth Council. And he totally, and I was like, oh shit, that's what we should call it. And he doesn't even remember saying that. So I don't know if he really said it or if I dreamt it or what, but
that's amazing.
It was just like unequivocally, I just knew that was the name of it from like early on. So I would just call it Mouth Council. And I was just like, people will get it later. Like I won't have to explain it as much, like when they see me doing it. Now it's become this thing where it's equally a performance where I can like play on a stage just like a normal band, and I'll invite audience members up or just other bands to come up. Or I've done it as like a team building exercise. I've also done it with just kids as like a playtime experience where everyone's just making noises. So that kind of thing. So it's this versatile like experience that I sort of just fell into, just like my other music. But I feel like it was sort of a response to the heaviness of Infinite Third, like the emotional heaviness, to like Mouth Council's like the sacred like playfulness. And that's the response to it, where Infinite Third I do by myself. It's this like really personal internal process that I share with an audience. And Mouth Council is like, there is no barrier of any of that.
Yeah.
I actually don't even provide that many original sounds. It's more the other people's sounds. I just sort of guide the experience. So it's my way of like, it's like the group version of what I do for myself. I do it with other people, but it's more based on them and celebrating them.
Yeah,
and expression.
I was going to ask if you had done something with kids with it, because it does seem like a really interesting. I was going to say structure, but it's the opposite of a structure. Like it's an interesting like way of organizing chaos around these like loosely creative formats versus what a lot of kids grow up in those types of settings, like in art classes or music classes, and they're learning very specific, rules and strategies and techniques. And like, this is a way that you could just really, like, for someone like me growing up, I don't know if I ever had ADHD, but like they wanted to diagnose me with it. Like I was just always, I couldn't pay attention. Like I was always just jittery and wanting to do something else and hated sitting down. And I, just for someone like me, like this is the type of thing that would have been great just as a kid to be able to express myself. It's like throwing paint at a canvas almost. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what's funnier. My funnier observation is that I've found kids to be way less inhibited in the activity than most adults.
Yeah.
that aren't drinking alcohol.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Some like drunk people are a certain thing where they'll like have this false sense of lack of inhibitions, but they're also not present in what they're doing. But thankfully, I have found a lot of amazing people who aren't necessarily drunk, but they can just like express free form like that, and it becomes so beautiful. But kids are more likely to just let loose. You give them the microphone, they know what to do. They're just like, okay, just make a noise. Yeah, that's what I do anyway. That's sort of the response I've gotten. And just this past New Year's Eve, I got hired by the city of St. Petersburg to come to this like family friendly event and basically like set up an area where I'm doing this mouth council thing on and off for about 3 hours in like 20-minute blocks. And I didn't realize it was going to be like all kids, but it was mostly all kids. And I had a blast. Like they were doing things that, adults would never do, like just the way they're screaming and stuff, and it was great. So it was sort of just a reminder that like, it's totally universal. And it's kind of like, I look at it as sort of like an organized, like drum circle. It's just for your throat and your mouth, it sort of allows everyone to get on the same page, and like we're all feeling that little thing. We're all looking at each other. It's a circle, it has a very primal aspect to it.
I love
even though it's electronic and it's only made possible by looping, which to not go too far off on a tangent, I totally recognize that looping is like, it's such a young act. Like it's only going to become more and more prevalent, and I think that that's beautiful, and I think it represents something in human evolution of sort of like the opportunity to really self-reflect in a way that we haven't been able to before. So you can basically collaborate with yourself and learn about yourself by it's almost like cloning, but in the sound form. It's like you clone yourself to like make a beat and then go be the bassist or do whatever you want to do and sing. And I just think that like it's metaphorical for the ways that for all the crazy shit going on in the world, we're gaining more tools to self-reflect in deeper ways.
Well, it's interesting too, just because as the cultures become more individualistic, and it is harder now for a lot of people to connect and to even just make the time to really get out and gather with friends and groups and organize in those ways. So it is really cool to have that tool as like a looper, because then you get to be the band, like you said, you get to do all this on your own. Whereas growing up, I'm sure there's a lot of kids specifically who maybe they live in a rural area where there's not a lot of people in general, or maybe they just have a hard time making friends, and like they can do this on their own then and express themselves in a really like unique, full way where you don't have the opportunity to do that unless you have other people without a looper pedal, because it's just you can only, like for me, like I grew up playing acoustic guitar. It's like you can only go so far with just an acoustic guitar, like unless like some people were prodigies, like some people can shred and do all sorts of crazy styles with it. But I mean, if you're just especially a beginner and you're picking up the chords of a guitar, there's only so much you could do. And then with a looper pedal, you can add a beat, you can add different rhythms, you can add a lead section on top of a rhythm, and it just really opens up the doors for creativity and even like you said, you're kind of taking it to the next level. I think for most people with a looper pedal, like I'm saying, you get the looper pedal because maybe you don't have a band or you don't have friends, but like you're taking it to that communal level then and now sharing that experience, which I think is it's an interesting evolution of the tool.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think it's been kept sort of like sacred for me too, because I tell the people when we're doing it, like, unless there's a camera around or something, which sometimes there is, I don't record the audio. Like it's made to be like, you know, that's just that song, and that particular vibe was like just for us. The majority of Mouth Council songs, some of them have been like brilliant and like no thanks to me, except maybe in the mixing a little bit. But like some of them has just been amazing, and like things that could never be recreated. They're like people just going crazy, and like the crowd also being equally invested into it adds like this other loop to it. And the funny thing is, like, once it's over, I just delete it and it's gone.
Yeah.
And I think that's something. It's almost like I don't know if this is the right metaphor, but like it's like if looping and communal looping and Mouth Council were a drug, like you can't control it too much. You have to respect it and be like, this is about the experience, not about extracting a product from this or necessarily content from this. Even though the content has existed and does exist, it's been totally by chance and only in the times where it was like prompted by someone else. But I felt like in order to be a good activity, I have to sort of respect the medium.
Yeah.
As though they were like mushrooms. I can't just like keep taking it and be like, oh, I gotta be wise, you know, like you have to listen to it and you have to like, you know, listen to what you need and what it needs and what the other people need. And I just feel like it's sort of I have to exist in like a humble place with it of just like, holy shit, like don't exploit that.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Like if you take a bunch of drugs and you jump in, like, I am going to ride the dragon, like the dragon's going to destroy you. Like you can't control it.
Totally.
Like, you just have to go along for the ride. That's a great way of putting it.
And music is like that, dude. It's like, it's powerful. So like you have to respect the practice and the medium of it.
So what's next for you?
Anyway,
I mean, like you have so much going on. I mean, do you have, like, with all these different projects, do you have long-term goals, or are you kind of just living in the moment? Or
no, I'm living the long-term goal of 2010 right now, you know, and they adjust as time goes, but I would definitely say that I'm aiming towards, obviously I told you about like this summer, we have the nonprofit launching BillyMays.org, which we kind of also call There's Always More, is sort of the tagline of it. It's sort of a play on, but wait, there's more.
I love that.
Yeah. So the idea being like, let's just generate some like abundance and be able to give it away and sort of like demonstrate that, you know, just that in the world. That like sometimes it's okay to just do things because it's helpful or it's good and not based on like profit or greed. So there's that. The beer is coming out, Billy Mays IPA, in tandem with that. I'm aiming for another fall project with that, where we'll sort of take another project on in that vein and benefit another cause. But kind of running parallel with that is also, it's sort of in pre-production, a documentary about my dad's life. It's not really like set in stone all the way, but there's a team and there's a lot of interest in it. And we're just sort of like seeing what path that's going to take. But it's definitely something I would like to do and tell my dad's story and sort of like my way of closing the book on his life a little bit. So there's that. And that's probably years away if you think about it, if we really want to do it right. But musically, I'm continuing on this 3 songs a month thing, just sort of as this rhythm I've developed. It's not quite once a week and it's not quite once a month. It's like kind of in the middle. And I'm hoping that these demos or sketches are leading to my new, like what I call an event album, like the way an Avengers movie is the event,
right?
the event movie, the team up. I'm hoping that I'm making like all the little origin stories right now. And then, probably 2020, I'll release the next like full-length event album. And I've been kind of conceptualizing that for a while, and I have album art for it and stuff. So that's on the horizon. A lot more touring. I'll be gone all of April and May almost, and also I'm planning another July run. So there's that. So I mean, yeah, I stay busy, but a lot of the projects are kind of beyond me, so I don't get to control the timing of them. The one that I do control is Infinite Third. Like I have full control of it. That's why I tour and that's why I do my thing, because it's me. It's the one man band. I can travel alone. I love it. It's like my default thing. Like that's what I'll be doing. If I lose all my gear again, I'll go out there and mess with a stick and
just figure
a speaker.
it out.
Yeah, like I've thought about this. Trust me, I've thought about what I would do if I had to revamp everything, or I lost everything, or lost an arm. Like, what would I do? I would find another way. I don't know.
It just hit me. That is there some type of Easter egg here? I mean, the whole name is Infinite Third, and you said earlier that you release the songs on the 3rd, the 13th, and the 23rd. Was that obviously intentional then?
Totally, yeah. I mean, Infinite Third is like, it was my version of what can I call my music that doesn't sound like it makes sense, but I've always like leaned towards like paradoxical things, because there's a real wisdom in a lot of paradoxes, like not so much contradictions, but like on the bigger level of like paradox.
Yeah. Things
that don't make sense, but they make more sense when the opposites are stated together. So like Infinite Third was sort of the play on I'm the third, I'm Billy Mays the third, and that's like this human side of me, and then like the infinite side is just this music and this whatever I'm channeling and whatever generational pulse I'm tapping into is sort of beyond me. It's not, and the music that I feel is my best is not really from my mind. It's not like my ego created it.
Right.
It's sort of beyond that. So I've always looked at Infinite Third as like I'm an ant, but I'm also like just a galaxy, like, and it's hard to explain, but I think we all are. You know, we're all just like, we're inconsequential, but like we're also everything rolled into one little speck. Everything, you know, divides down infinitely. So I think that's the best meaning of Infinite Third that I can muster up.
All right, Deepak Chopra.
Totally.
I love it, man. I love it. No, I just realized what time it was. I really appreciate just all the insights and you being so vulnerable again with all this. It's such a, you know, it's sensitive stuff, and it's great, you know, knowing that there's someone out there like you who's embracing all of it in its totality and using all the tools at your disposal literally to express it out in the world and just own what it is. I mean, I think it's really, really cool, and you know, I hope that you continue to be able to integrate all these projects into whatever the ultimate thing is. And I know, just granted, everything that you've been saying,
death is the ultimate.
I was just gonna say, granted everything you've been saying, you're very much like a live in the moment, like let's just take this all in stride type of guy, because we all know, you know, how finite everything is, I guess, to a degree. But it's really cool that, like, with the time that we've got, the time that you've got, that you're sharing all this, and it's great. You know, I'm really, really stoked for all these projects.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, and like before we go, I mean, I just thought, like, what's I'm sure there's a lot of shit that you could say here, but like, what's like an example of something that maybe your dad passed on to you, maybe like either advertently or inadvertently, that you feel like you can pay forward now.
Okay. There's one thing that I like to reference that I'm pretty sure this is on record that he said this, but I know he used to tell me this anyway. Well, there's two things. One thing that's kind of funny is when I was a kid, it was like this dad joke where we would see a sunset, like Florida sunsets are beautiful. And he would be like, see that? You'll never see another one like that. And I was always like, oh, shut up. But like,
but
it became like, it ended up becoming like this mantra for me, for everything. And I think I wrote something on Medium, a really quick little essay about it, where it was me reflecting on that and like how I don't know if he meant it that deep or if it was just like a stupid joke. Mm-hmm. But like either way, it's been like time capsule, like slow release capsule, like medicine for me. But that's one thing. You'll never see another one like that. And then the other thing is he would always, you know, he was a performer, and his art ended up being mostly like towards the end, he would have to go and perform like these takes in front of a group of people, in front of like a whole set of people, and turn it on and become that Pitchman. And so he had this like breathing exercise he would do, and he got super intense when he was about to do it. It was like he would get laser focused, and he'd deep breathe through his belly, and it was fun to watch. But then like when he would go on the Tonight Show or any talk show or like public appearance, he would get kind of nervous, you know, like you could tell he was just like jittery, like anyone would be. And I think there's this clip of him, but I know he used to say this anyway, that like nerves are good. They just remind you that you're alive. And then I take that as like you get nervous. A lot of people are like, they call it stage fright or, anxiety or something like that. But really it's just energy bubbling up. And then like you capitalize on that and you use it and you direct it and you harness it. And I just always felt like now my response to someone being nervous about something such as performing, I just say like, good, that means you're on the right track. Like you're doing something that excites you, it scares you, it challenges you, but like you can do it. You definitely can, because it's essentially just getting in front of people and existing. So
I love that.
That is something that I like to pass along. Like, nerves are good. They mean you're alive. Yeah.
No, that's a great quote. I mean, I feel literally, even just doing this podcast, as a songwriter as well, that's just one of those things, yeah, like you said, associated with stage fright most commonly, but even like recording shit, like I remember the first few times I did a podcast, and I still feel it before every episode, but especially in like the beginning when I was trying to get a footing, it's like you go into it and you're talking to someone, in a lot of cases for me, I'm speaking to people that I really respect their work, or like they're someone who are notable in a given field, and I'm going into it as just this schmuck who's really trying to like pull out a conversation, and it does make you feel alive. It's like before, like you're sweating and you get those nerves, and then you get into it and it's like all that energy just pours into the conversation, and hopefully it becomes something cool. So I really I resonate with that hard, and that's a great bit.
Yeah, dude, I just have to say I respect what you're doing, and I appreciate people out there digging into these things with people. And I got to listen to a few of your other episodes recently when we connected. And I just feel like I'm glad that you're out here doing this, man. Keep doing it.
Damn, man. Yeah, thanks so much. Well, it means a lot that you want to be part of it. I forget. Was it Matt that connected with us?
It was Matt. Yeah, Matt Staggs.
Hey, what a legend. He's such a nice guy. Like, seriously. Yeah. Literally, before I didn't know anyone in this spectrum of, especially on Twitter, which is where we got introduced. And he right off the bat was just like DMing me and like, oh, would you want to talk to this person? Like, what do you think about this? And I'm like, man, this is like such a, I don't know. Like, there's great people out there sometimes, and it really,
yeah, definitely,
yeah. But anyway, it means a ton, man. I really appreciate that you came on, and dedicated so much time to this. You got a really fascinating story, and really love your work.
Thanks, man.
Good stuff. All right, man. Well, I guess cool. I'll talk to you back on Twitter, and until then, enjoy life.
All right, you too, man.
All right,
thanks.
See ya.